His cold fingers tightened on my chin, forcing my gaze to meet his. I felt the entire hall hold its breath. A bastard and a king face to face. The air seemed to freeze between us as he whispered for my ears alone. Everyone thinks you are my ruin, but I know the truth. You are my salvation. And when his lips touched my forehead, sealing my fate before the entire court, I knew I would never be free again. Not from the crown, not from him, not from myself. Before we delve into this tale, let its resonance stir your thoughts and ponder its message from the quiet comfort of your own hearth. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart. The night smelled of wine and burnt jasmine. From the main hall's balconies, I saw the chandeliers hanging like pale moons, and the laughter, thin, sharp, mingled with the clinking of crystal glasses. Everyone toasted the new moon. The ladies, in their silver gowns, twirled like reflections of the light itself, and I, leaning in the shadow of the iron gate, clutched my two little ones, my pups, as they called them with disdain, as if motherhood made me less worthy of breathing the same gilded air they did. There was something cruel in the way the laughter echoed within the castle walls. Every sound seemed to remind me of where I came from. The kitchens, the damp corridors, the cold that crept up my feet as I scrubbed floors with bare hands. I didn't belong to that world of velvet and gold, and yet I had been dragged into it, like a dry leaf caught in the whirlwind of others' wills. They said I should be grateful, that a bastard raised among servants should never look up. And yet I looked. I always looked. That night, my arms held the children tight against my chest, seeking in them the warmth the world denied me. The wind crept through the cracks, and each gust carried the distant echo of the music from within, a melody that didn't belong to me, but still wounded me. Shadows danced on the marble, and the newborn moon rose between the towers, cold and indifferent. I thought perhaps this was what it meant to exist on the margins, to see everything, feel everything, and yet remain invisible. But then the hall fell silent. A dull sound like contained thunder swept through the space. When I looked up, I saw that he had arrived. King Alpha, the man whose presence made the air grow thick as if time itself hesitated before him. He wore black, and his shoulders seemed made to bear the weight of entire kingdoms. His eyes, an impossible grey, swept the hall, and every gaze cast in his direction bowed in reverence. He did not speak, he merely existed, and that was enough. I knew him, though I had never touched him. He was the same man who months earlier had decreed my silent exile. The same man who, because of someone else's mistake, had believed I carried unsuitable blood, a sullied name. And yet, there he was, crossing the hall between columns and curtains, coming toward me. The sound of his footsteps was the only living thing in that instant. The ladies whispered. The men averted their eyes. No one dared breathe loudly. When he stopped before me, the silence weighed so heavily that even my children fell quiet. "Why are you out here?" he asked, his voice like thunder beneath flesh. "Because here is the only place I am not reminded of what I cannot be." He watched me for a long time, and in that gaze was something that broke me apart and remade me in a single second. A recognition, an echo, a danger. The murmur grew behind him, and I felt the sparks of 1,000 eyes on me. The women, beautiful and cruel, gnawed at their masks of curiosity. The men, tense, awaited the sentence, as if the king was about to undo an ancient law. Then he extended his hand, and the gesture was so unexpected that the entire hall held its breath. "Come," he simply said. And it was there, before everyone, that I realized the new moon shone not for them, but for me. The scandal was immediate. I heard the whispers, "The bastard? At the children's mother? Or the forgotten one?" I saw rage flicker in the eyes of Lady Myrenne, the one who expected to be crowned his consort. I felt the weight of each gaze pierce my skin like cold blades. Even so, I took a step forward. My bare feet touched the stone floor, and the sound echoed like an oath. He did not retreat. On the contrary, he took another step, like one claiming what he always knew was his. When his hand touched mine, something within me, which I believed dead, breathed. But what wounded me most was not the touch, but the certainty that this gesture would be the beginning of my ruin, because nothing is more dangerous than to be seen by the man everyone fears. Later, when the hall resumed its noise and the musicians tried, in vain, to bring lightness back to the air, I realized the world had changed. The king had not returned to the throne. He remained near me, in silence, watching me like one protecting a secret, and I knew from that moment on that the price of his attention would be paid with the rest of my peace. That night, while everyone still toasted the new moon, I, forgotten, already knew that destiny had chosen me as an offering. My children slept innocent, and I understood that what was about to begin was not love. It was something much older and more dangerous, the reparation of a wrong that was never mine. And when King Alpha leaned slightly, murmuring that no one else will dare touch what is mine, I realized the cold that ran through me was not from the night. It was the harbinger of fire. It was as if a sentence had been passed. The gazes burned my skin like live coals, each sharper than the last. Lady Myrenne left the hall with hard steps, dragging her wounded pride like an overly heavy cloak. The other ladies followed her like sheep in a stampede. The king seemed not to notice, or perhaps, and this terrified me more, he didn't care. "Your children need a proper room," he said after a time that seemed eternal. "And so do you." "My children have a place, Your Highness, and so do I." "Not anymore." These two words, simple as stones, fell upon me with the weight of an entire mountain. It was an order, not a request, and nothing in my world had prepared me to disobey a king. I felt my body tremble not from cold, but from an ancestral fear. Not the fear of power, but the fear that for the first time, someone might see beyond the layers I had so carefully built around myself. "You are afraid of me," he stated. "Not asked. I am afraid of what you represent." "And what do I represent to you, Eileen?" My name in his mouth sounded strange, as if he were tasting it, testing its flavor. No one had called me by my name in so long that I had almost forgotten its sound. It was always the bastard and the mother, the servant, never Eileen. The last person to call me that was my mother, before the fever took her. "You represent the power that can crush without even realizing it does so," I replied, braver than I felt. A smile, almost imperceptible, touched the corner of his lips. It was not of scorn or cruelty. It was something more dangerous. Recognition. "Come with me, Eileen. Bring your children." And so it was, amidst whispers and cutting glances, that I crossed the main hall with my two sleeping children in my arms, following the king's footsteps like a reluctant shadow. Each step we climbed took me further from the world I knew, the world of kitchens, coarse clothes, rough hands. Each corridor we crossed led me deeper into the labyrinth of a destiny I never asked for. And yet, there was something in me, a timid and dangerous flame that refused to be extinguished. I woke to the cold morning light flooding the room through curtains that seemed made of mist. For an instant, I thought I was dreaming. The mattress beneath me was soft as clouds, so different from the straw pallet I was accustomed to. It took me a few seconds to remember where I was, in the royal chambers, in an antechamber reserved for high-ranking visitors, a place that, until the night before, I would never have been allowed to even clean. My children were still asleep, curled into each other like wolf pups. Eleanor, the elder at 6 years old, hugged little Tam, just 4, protecting him even in sleep. They were so much like me, the same dark hair, the same fair skin that reddened easily, that no one ever questioned whose children they were. The question that always lingered, whispered in the castle corners, was who the father might be. The door opened without warning, and in came an older woman, simply dressed, but with a posture that spoke of authority. I recognized her immediately, Madame Ciel, the castle's head governess, who supervised all the maids and servants. Her eyes swept the room and settled on me with a mix of curiosity and caution. "Rise, Eileen. The king expects you and the children to be ready by noon." "Ready for what?" She looked at me as if I had asked an absurd question. "For the council. The king will announce his decision regarding you and your children." A chill ran down my spine. Decision. The word sounded like a sentence. I didn't know what to expect, whether I would be banished permanently from the kingdom, relegated to some service position in a distant corner of the castle, or something worse. Perhaps, I thought with a knot in my throat. He would separate the children from me, placing them as apprentices in some guild or monastery. Would this be the price of a king's interest? There are clothes in the wardrobe, Madame Ciel continued. Bathe and dress the children appropriately. When she withdrew, I stood in the middle of the room, stunned. Opening the indicated wardrobe, I almost recoiled in fright. There were dresses made of fabrics I had only touched to wash or mend, never to wear. Silks, velvets, fine wools. And they weren't old clothes, passed down as charity. They were new, some still with the tailor's pins. I woke the children gently. They looked around, confused, and soon began to explore the room with the curiosity of their age. "Mama, why are we here?" Elena asked, touching a small wooden harp on a side table. How to explain to a child something I didn't even understand myself? How to make her comprehend that our world had been turned upside down in a single night, and that I didn't know if it was good or bad? "The king has invited us to stay here for a while." "Why?" she insisted, with that relentless frankness of children. "I don't know, dear, but we will find out soon." After we bathed in perfumed water, a luxury that made Tam squeal with delight, I chose the simplest of dresses for myself. A dark blue woolen one, unadorned except for a silver cord at the waist. For the children, equally simple clothes, but of a quality I never dreamed I could provide them. As I braided Elena's hair, I felt a knot form in my throat. What does it mean to dress your children in clothes you could never afford? What does it mean to accept them from a man whose intentions you don't know? Shortly before noon, Madame Ciel returned to escort us. In the corridors, the servants stopped to watch our passage, some with wide eyes of surprise, others with disguised smiles. Some, however, especially the younger ladies, cast glances sharp as daggers. I recognized several of the girls who had mocked me over the years, calling me mother of sin and inventing stories about my children's origin. We arrived at a small waiting room adjacent to the council chamber. There, Madame Ciel instructed us to wait. The children, restless after being contained for so long, began to run around the space, their laughter echoing off the stone walls. I tried to calm them, aware that decorum was expected of us, when the main door opened and Lady Meren entered, followed by two of her ladies-in-waiting. The air seemed to freeze instantly. Lady Meren was the niece of the Duke of Vallisea, a man of great influence in the kingdom. For months, rumours had circulated that she would be the natural choice for the king's consort. Tall, with golden hair and porcelain skin, she was considered the jewel of the court, and now she stared at me as if I were a stain on her immaculate gown. "So it's true," she said, her melodious voice laced with venom. "The bastard and her bastards have been invited to the council." I remained silent, pulling the children closer to me. Eleanor looked at Lady Meren with curiosity, but Tam hid his face in my skirts. "Nothing to say, Aline," she continued, taking a step toward me. "Or should I call you future queen, as the rumours in the corridors say?" I felt my face burn with shame and indignation. "The rumours lie, my lady. I have no idea why the king has summoned us." A cruel smile formed on her perfect lips. "No? Well, I have my suspicions. Perhaps he has finally discovered the truth about these pups." My blood ran cold. The truth? What could she know? Or was it just another empty provocation? "My children are not your concern, my lady." "They may not be, indeed. But they could be the king's concern, couldn't they? Especially if there are similarities." Before I could reply, the council chamber door opened. A herald announced that we were being called. Lady Meren cast me one last look filled with scorn before gliding into the room. I took a deep breath, adjusted the children's clothes, and followed in her wake, my heart beating like a war drum. The council chamber was a wide, dark stone semicircle with colourful stained glass windows that filtered the sunlight, creating pools of colour on the marble floor. Around a crescent-shaped table sat the most powerful men in the kingdom: the Lord Chancellor, the Duke of Vallisea, the Commander of the Royal Guard, the High Priest of the Order of the Moon, and several others whose titles I did not know. In the centre, in an elevated chair that looked more like a secondary throne, sat King Alpha Darius Valanis, sovereign of the northern reaches and lord of all my eyes could behold. Upon seeing us, the king gestured for us to approach. I felt everyone's eyes fixed on us, some curious, others hostile. Lady Mirren had already taken her place beside her uncle, the Duke, and watched me with a cold smile. "Gentlemen of the council," the king began, his deep voice silencing all murmurs. "I present Eileen of Rosecliff and her children, Elena and Tam, Rosecliff." He used the name of the village where I was born, not the surname Vance that had been imposed on me when I was brought to the castle as an orphan. It was a small detail, but significant, as if he was deliberately avoiding associating me with the family that had adopted me out of charity. A family of middle standing in the castle hierarchy, but one that had always made sure to remind me that I was merely a servant, not a daughter. "Your Majesty," interrupted the Duke of Vallisea, his voice laden with barely disguised disdain. "Forgive me, but I do not understand why a servant and her children would merit the attention of this council." The king did not respond immediately. Instead, his eyes, that impossible grey that seemed to hold storms, rested on me so intensely that I felt exposed, as if he could see through my clothes, my skin, to the core of my most guarded secrets. "Because, Duke," he said finally, without taking his gaze from me, "Eileen is not who everyone thinks she is." A heavy silence fell over the council chamber. I felt my knees weaken, but I held firm, clutching my children's hands, one on each side. King Darius's gaze did not leave mine for an instant, as if he were daring me to contradict him. "If Eileen is not who we think," spoke the Lord Chancellor, an elderly man with a white beard and shrewd eyes, "then who is she, Your Majesty?" The king finally shifted his gaze from me and swept the council with silent authority. 10 years ago, when I ascended the throne after my father's death, one of my first decisions was to send messengers to all provinces to identify orphaned children of our soldiers fallen in the war against the Vasani. I considered it our kingdom's obligation to care for the children of those who shed their blood for our borders. He paused, and I noticed several councillors nodding in approval. The initiative was well known and had earned the young king at the time a reputation as a compassionate ruler. Among the children brought to the castle was Eileen of Rosecliff. She was registered as the daughter of an unknown soldier and a common woman who died in childbirth. She was sent to serve in the Vance household, like many other orphans. The Duke of Vallisea cleared his throat, visibly impatient. "Forgive me, Your Majesty, but what importance does a servant's story hold?" "Every importance, Duke," the king replied, with a coldness that made the other man recoil slightly. "Because recently I discovered that the reports were falsified. Eileen is not the daughter of just any soldier." My heart pounded. What was he talking about? My mother had told me stories about my father, a man I never knew, killed in battle before my birth. That was all I knew, all I had ever known. I felt Elena squeeze my hand tighter as if she sensed my discomfort. "She is the daughter," the king continued, his voice now laden with contained emotion, "of Lord Alaric Tormain, commander of the Northern Vanguard and my mentor." A murmur of astonishment swept through the room. Even I almost choked on the revelation. Lord Alaric Tormain was a legend in the kingdom, one of the greatest military strategists in recent history, whose mysterious death 15 years ago was still the subject of whispered stories at night. "This is absurd." Lady Mirren could not contain her indignation. "Lord Tormain had no children. Everyone knows that." "He had no recognized children," the king corrected. "But he maintained a secret relationship with a woman from Rosecliff. When she became pregnant, he planned to acknowledge the child after the Northern Campaign. Unfortunately, he never returned." The high priest, a thin man with piercing eyes, leaned forward. "With all due respect, Your Majesty, what proof do we have of this? It is an extraordinary claim." The king gestured, and a servant approached, carrying a carved wooden box. Darius opened it, revealing a silver locket with the symbol of a crescent moon crossed by a sword, Lord Tormain's personal emblem. This locket was found among Eileen's belongings when she was brought to the castle. It was taken from her and hidden, deliberately, I believe, to keep her identity a secret. I looked at the locket, astonished. I had never seen it before, never known of its existence. But something within me, an ancestral memory perhaps, seemed to recognize it. "Furthermore," the king continued, "I have letters. Letters from Lord Tormain, to Eline's mother, speaking of the daughter to come and his plans for her. Lady Myrenne let out a sharp, almost hysterical laugh. Letters. Anyone can forge letters. Anyone save Lord Tormain, the king replied with a threatening calm. His writing style was unmistakable, and more importantly, the letters were authenticated by Lord Tormain's own brother, who recognized the handwriting. And where is this brother? Challenged the Duke of Valencia. Why is he not here to confirm personally? Because he is dead, replied the Lord Chancellor, surprising everyone. His ancient eyes studied me with a new light. Lord Bryce Tormain died 3 months ago, shortly after sending a sealed message to the king. That is what initiated this investigation, is it not, Your Majesty? The king nodded gravely. Lord Bryce learned on his deathbed that his brother's daughter had been brought to the castle years ago. Fearing that the same fate that silenced Alaric might befall her, he kept the information secret until his last moments. A heavy silence fell over the room. The implications were clear. Someone had deliberately hidden my identity. Perhaps the same person who had something to do with my supposed father's mysterious death. I still don't understand. I finally spoke, my voice firmer than I expected. If this is true, why reveal it now? Why bring me to this council with my children? The look the king cast me contained something I could not decipher. A mixture of determination, duty, and something deeper, more dangerous. Because, as Lord Tormain's legitimate daughter, you are heir to his lands, titles, and position on the council. Lands that for the past 15 years have been administered by the crown, and which would conveniently return to the king's control now that he discovered the lost heir, commented the Duke, not hiding his skepticism. No, Duke, the lands will be returned in full to Eileen, as is her right. As for her position on the council, the king paused, and again that intense gaze pierced me. That will depend on her. Lady Myrenne rose abruptly. This is ridiculous. A servant, a single mother with bastards sitting on the council. The word bastards hit me like a physical blow. I felt Elena flinch beside me, old enough to understand the insult. A heat rose up my neck, not of shame, but of a rage I rarely allowed myself to feel. My children are not bastards, Lady Myrenne, I replied, my voice low but clear. They have a father just as I apparently had mine. That none of us were recognized does not diminish our worth or our blood. A murmur swept through the room. No one expected me to respond, much less with such firmness. The king's eyes gleamed with something that seemed like approval. The matter of Eileen's children, he said with an authority that silenced everyone, will be dealt with separately. For now the council must decide. Do we recognize Eileen as the legitimate daughter of Lord Alaric Tormain and, therefore, as heir to his lands and titles? The vote was tense. The Lord Chancellor, the Commander of the Guard, and the High Priest voted in favour. The Duke of Valencia and 2 other lords voted against. It fell to the king himself to cast the deciding vote. In favour, he said without hesitation. From this moment, Eileen of Rosecliff shall be recognised as Lady Eileen Tormain, heir to the Northern Reaches and legitimate daughter of Lord Alaric. It was as if the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. Lady! I, who had spent my life scrubbing floors and sewing dresses for others. This is an outrage. Lady Myrenne could not contain her fury. A conspiracy to weaken the great families and strengthen the king's control. Mind your words, niece, the Duke warned, though his eyes also burned with rage. I care not for conspiracies or power plays, I said, finding my voice again. I only want to know what this means for my children. The king then rose and everyone in the room stood in respect. He descended the steps that separated his throne from the central area and walked directly toward me, so close that I could feel the warmth emanating from his body, so close that for the first time I noticed a small scar above his left eyebrow. It means, Lady Eileen, that they are no longer the children of a servant, but of a noble, he said, his voice low, almost intimate. It means they will receive education, training, and position befitting their new status. And the price of this, Your Majesty? I asked, the words escaping before I could contain them. For everything in this world has a price. An unexpected, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. A lesson you learned harshly, I imagine. The only way someone like me could learn. He nodded, as if approving my frankness. The price, Lady Elaine, will be discussed in private. For now, you and your children will be escorted to your new quarters in the noble wing of the castle. Servants will be assigned to attend to you, and tutors for the children. Tomorrow at dawn, I would like your presence in the private gardens. We have much to discuss about your future, and mine. The new quarters were larger than the entire house where I grew up in Rosecliff. 3 rooms connected by a common sitting room with wide windows that opened onto the castle's west gardens. Furniture of dark carved wood, tapestries on the walls, a stone fireplace that a servant kept constantly lit, and most surprisingly, 4 servants assigned exclusively to us. 1 for me, a nanny for each child and a page for errands and minor tasks. I, who had always served, was now served. The sensation was as uncomfortable as the silk dresses that filled the new wardrobe. The children, however, adapted with the ease of childhood. Eleanor spent the afternoon exploring every corner of the quarters, opening drawers, touching everything with cautious reverence. Tam, more impetuous, bounced on the soft beds, shouting with joy each time his small body sank into the feather quilts. "Mama, are we rich now?" Elena asked as I braided her hair before bed. "No, dear. Apparently we are noble. What's the difference?" I smiled at her shrewd innocence. "Wealth is what you have. Nobility is what others believe you are." She frowned, processing the information. "And do they believe we are noble now?" "Some do, others don't. Like Lady Moraine." I flinched at the name. Even a child had perceived the hatred in that woman's eyes. Lady Moraine has her own reasons for disliking change. After settling the children, I dismissed the nanny who insisted on helping. I needed solitude to organize my thoughts, to try to understand the maelstrom my life had become. I sat by the window watching the moon rise in the night sky. The same moon that illuminated the nights I scrubbed the main hall floor or sewed by candlelight. A soft knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. It was Madame Ciel, the governess, carrying a tray with tea and biscuits. "I imagined you wouldn't be able to sleep." "Lady Eileen," she said, placing the tray on a table. The title still sounded strange, especially coming from her who for years had given me orders. "I am not a lady." "Madame Ciel, no matter what the council decided," she smiled, a tired smile of one who had seen many things in that castle. "You are what the king says you are. This is the first and most important rule of court." I poured tea for both of us, a gesture that made her raise her eyebrows in surprise. A lady would not serve the governess, of course. But I was not a lady, not truly. "Why is he doing this?" I finally asked. "Why elevate me this way? And why now?" Madame Ciel took a sip of tea, her eyes never leaving mine. "There are rumors, of course." "There always are." "What rumors?" "That the king needs loyal allies on the council. That the Duke of Valisea's faction grows in power. That the king seeks ways to strengthen his position without appearing authoritarian. And I would be that ally." I almost laughed at the idea. "A former servant who barely reads beyond the basics." "You would be more than an ally, Lady Eileen. You would be a symbol. The daughter of the great Lord Tormane, restored to her rightful place by the just king." There was something in her tone that suggested she didn't entirely believe that narrative. And the truth? She looked at the flames in the fireplace, as if searching for words among the sparks. "The truth is rarely simple in the castle, but there is one thing I can tell you. The king does nothing without purpose. And his interest in you and your children," she hesitated, "has existed longer than you imagine." A shiver ran down my spine. "What do you mean?" "Only that, even before Lord Bryce sent that letter, the king had already inquired about you, discreetly, through intermediaries." "Why?" Madame Ciel placed her cup on the tray and stood up. "That, my dear, is something only he can answer. And I fear that tomorrow in the gardens you will discover much more than you expect." After she left, I remained awake for hours, my eyes fixed on the moon. I remembered all the times I had seen the king from afar, always distant, always unattainable, like a cold star in the sky. And then I remembered the moment he extended his hand to me in the hall, how his fingers had touched mine, the unexpected warmth of that touch. when sleep finally came. It was populated by confused dreams where I ran through stone labyrinths, pursued by shadows. And at every corner I turned, there he was, King Alpha, with his grey eyes and his outstretched hand. Dawn brought a thin mist that covered the gardens like a bridal veil. I dressed carefully, choosing the most discreet of the new dresses, a dark green wool one with long sleeves and a high collar. I pinned my hair in a simple bun. No jewels, nothing that might suggest I was fully accepting this new position. The children were still asleep when I left, leaving instructions for the nanny about breakfast. The page guided me through corridors and staircases I had never traversed before, to a small wrought iron gate that gave access to the king's private gardens. The garden was an enclosed space surrounded by high stone walls covered in ivy. In the center, a fountain with the statue of a woman holding a crescent moon, the ancient goddess Lunara, protector of the kingdom. Around it, beds of medicinal herbs and winter flowers. And there, with his back to me, stood the king. He wasn't wearing formal court clothes, but a simple set of black trousers and tunic, with only a silver sash at his waist indicating his position. No crown, no ostentatious symbols of power. Almost a common man, were it not for his posture, the way he occupied the space, as if the entire garden were merely an extension of his presence. "Lady Aline," he said, without turning. How had he known I was there? "Your Majesty." "Come, walk with me." I approached and took my place beside him, maintaining a respectful distance. Up close, I noticed things I had never perceived before. The subtle weariness around his eyes, the premature silver threads in his dark hair, the constant tension in his shoulders. We walked in silence for a few minutes, only the sound of our footsteps on the white gravel paths. I felt uneasy, exposed under his occasional glance. Finally, I stopped by a bed of white winter roses, rare flowers that bloomed even on the coldest nights. "Why am I here, Your Majesty?" He also stopped, looking not at me, but at the distant mountains, visible beyond the castle walls. "Because I made a promise to a dying man." "Lord Bryce?" "Tormain." "Yes, he asked me to find his brothers, daughter and protector. But it wasn't just for that, was it? There's something more. Something you didn't tell the council." A near smile touched his lips. "Perceptive. Like your father." The mention of Lord Alaric, a man I never knew but who was apparently my father, made my chest tighten. I know nothing about him, about who he truly was. "He was the best man I ever knew," the king replied, his voice dropping an octave. "He was the one who taught me to fight, to hunt, to govern. When my own father, the old king, was too busy with his conquests and feasts, it was Alaric who showed me what it meant to be a true leader." There was genuine pain in his voice, an unhealed grief. "How did he die?" The king's face hardened. "Officially a hunting accident. In reality," he paused, as if measuring his words, "murder." I felt my blood run cold. By whom? That is what I am still discovering after all these years. And that is why I kept you under discreet observation since I learned of your existence. I feared the same fate might befall you. "And my children? Are they also in danger?" A dark look crossed his face. "Your children are part of the reason I finally decided to bring you into the light. Especially the boy. Tam, what about him?" The king moved closer, closing the distance between us until I could feel the warmth of his body. "His eyes, Eileen. Have you never noticed? The impossible grey. The exact same shade as my father's eyes. The same shade as mine." My heart almost stopped. It was true. Tam's eyes had always been peculiar. A silvery grey that neither I nor anyone in the family I knew possessed. Eyes I had always attributed to the unknown father I invented to explain his existence. "What are you insinuating?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I am not insinuating anything. I am stating." His hand rose, lightly touching my face, a gesture so unexpected that I froze. 7 years ago, there was a festival in the lowlands. A young prince disguised as a common hunter met a young servant who had gone to visit her home village. Memories erupted like bubbles, rising to the surface of my consciousness. The Rosecliff Festival. The mysterious stranger with grey eyes who danced with me under the lanterns, who led me to the silver lake where we made love under the stars. The man who promised to return but never did. The man whose face I had never clearly seen again until now. You? I stammered, incredulous. But how? Why? Because at that time I was young and impetuous. Because I wanted to know my people without the weight of the crown. Because I saw a young woman of wild beauty dancing as if the world would end at dawn, and I could not resist. Tears burned in my eyes. 7 years of silent shame, of enduring scornful glances, of inventing stories about a deceased husband who never existed. You abandoned me, left me pregnant and alone. I did not know. His voice was firm, but there was a touch of regret. When I returned to the festival the following year to look for you, I was told you had gone to the castle. I tried to find you, but no one knew of an Elaine of Rosecliff. You had become just another nameless servant. And Elena? I asked, my voice trembling. Is she also? He hesitated. No, her eyes are like yours. She must have another father. It was true. Elena had been born earlier, the fruit of a brief love with a young baker who had died of fever before even knowing I was pregnant. But the king did not need to know that. So Tam is my son, yes, and therefore a prince by birth. The revelation fell upon me like an avalanche. My son, my little Tam with perpetually scraped knees and easy laughter, was heir to the throne. Royal blood ran in his veins. And I, who had always been nobody, had given birth to a prince. Why reveal this now? I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. Why not 3 years ago or 5? Because the kingdom is in danger, he replied, his face shadowed by genuine concern. There is a growing faction on the council led by the Duke of Valisea that seeks to weaken the royal lineage. They are pressuring me to marry Lady Miren, knowing she is incapable of bearing children. How do you know this? A dark look crossed his face. I have my spies just as the Duke has his. Lady Miren suffered a fever in childhood that left her barren. It is a well-kept secret, known only to her family and to me. And they want you to marry her so there will be no heirs. So the royal line ends with you? He nodded. Precisely. And then the throne would pass to the Duke's lineage, as my cousin is married to his eldest son. The pieces began to fall into place. A complex political plan hatched over years involving alliances, marriages, and likely assassinations. And I? What is my role in this Game of Thrones? The king moved even closer, his grey eyes penetrating mine with an intensity that made me hold my breath. You, Lady Eileen Tormain, will be my queen. The proposal, or was it an order, echoed in the silent garden. For a moment I thought I had misheard. Your queen? I repeated, the words sounding foreign on my tongue. My queen. My consort, my wife, he confirmed, with a certainty that seemed unshakable. I took a step back, the need for physical distance, as strong as the mental confusion that flooded me. This is madness. It is strategy. It is impossible. It is necessary. That coldness with which he turned my life into a chess piece struck me like ice water. All the previous emotion, when we spoke of Tam, of our night under the stars, had vanished, replaced by this pragmatic calculation. The council will never accept, I argued, a former servant as queen. They would prefer civil war. The council will accept because they will have no choice. As Lord Tormain's legitimate daughter, you have noble enough lineage, and as the mother of my son. A son no one knows is yours. A son everyone will know is mine, at the right time. I shook my head, stunned by the speed of events. Yesterday I was a servant. Today I am a lady. Tomorrow I will be queen. This is absurd. This is destiny. The word destiny hit me like an arrow. How many times had I wondered why my life had taken the turns it did? Why I lost my mother so early, why I was torn from Rosecliff, why I met that mysterious stranger on the night of the festival, why I had children without a husband. Was it all part of a larger plan, a destiny traced beyond my comprehension? What if I refuse? I asked, lifting my chin in a gesture of defiance. The king's face hardened, just for an instant, before a cold smile touched his lips. You have that option, of course. You can refuse the throne, refuse the crown, refuse the title of queen. He paused, his eyes never leaving mine. But you cannot refuse the fact that Tam is my son. And as such, he must receive appropriate education, training, and protection. With me, in the castle. I immediately understood the veiled threat. You would separate a child from his mother. I would protect a prince, whatever the cost. I felt my blood run cold. The chill in his voice, the hardness in his gaze. This was the true King Alpha, the man who commanded armies and decided over the life and death of thousands with a simple nod. You are not the man I knew that night, I said softly, more to myself than to him. For a brief moment, something akin to remorse crossed his face. That man died long ago, suffocated by the weight of the crown. His voice softened a little. But perhaps with you by my side, he can breathe again. It was a moment of vulnerability so unexpected that it caught me off guard. Behind the mask of the ruthless king, I glimpsed the young man who had danced with me under the stars, who had made me feel desired, special, loved, even if only for one night. I don't know how to be queen, I confessed, and I didn't know how to be king. We learn with time and necessity. What would happen to Eleanor? She is not your daughter. She would be treated as such. She would receive the same status, the same protection, the same privileges as Tam. He hesitated briefly. I would formally adopt her if you permit. The idea of Elena, my sweet girl with curious eyes, becoming a princess was almost as surreal as Tam being a prince. And Lady Myrenne, the Duke of Valencia? Would they accept this peacefully? A dangerous glint lit his eyes. They have no choice but to accept their king's will. His hand touched my arm gently. But make no mistake, Aline, they will fight, with intrigues, with poisons, with every weapon the court possesses. Then why put me in this position? Why not choose a more suitable bride? Because I need someone who has no prior loyalties at court. Someone who is not committed to the old alliances and factions. Someone who sees the court for what it truly is, not for what it pretends to be. Someone like a servant who watched everything from the shadows for years. Precisely. It was a clever plan, I had to admit. And yet, is it only for this? For political strategy? The question escaped before I could contain it. More vulnerable than I intended, his grey eyes studied me for a long time, as if trying to decipher something hidden within me. 7 years ago, when I returned to the festival and did not find you, I felt a loss I could not explain. A woman I knew for only one night, and yet... He shook his head as if grappling with old memories. Since I discovered who you were, since I saw our son... Our son, I repeated, the reality still strange on my lips. Yes, our son. A genuine smile touched his lips for the first time. He has my eyes, but your spirit. Your courage. We stood in silence for a moment. The weight of the revelation, of the proposal, of everything that had happened in the last 24 hours, hanging between us like a dense cloud. How much time do I have to decide? I finally asked. The official announcement will be made in 3 days during the new moon ball. 3 days. 3 days to decide the fate of my life, my future, the future of my children. And if I accept, what happens then? He took a step forward, eliminating the distance between us. His hand rose, touching my face with surprising gentleness. Then, Lady Elaine, we rebuild this kingdom. Together. For a moment, just a fleeting moment, I allowed myself to imagine me wearing a crown. Me sitting beside him on the throne. Me walking among those who once scorned me, now forced to bow before me. It was an intoxicating and terrifying thought at the same time. I need to think, I said, moving away from his touch. I need to consider what is best for my children. He nodded, understanding. Of course. But remember, Eileen, alone you are merely the rediscovered daughter of a dead noble. With Tam recognized as my son, you are the mother of a prince. And as my queen, his eyes shone with something that seemed almost reverence, as my queen, you would be untouchable. When I returned to my quarters, I found the children playing under the watchful eye of the nanny. Elena was drawing on a parchment with charcoal, while Tam stacked wooden blocks, building what looked like a miniature castle. I watched him with new eyes, his determined chin, the way he frowned in concentration, the silvery grey of his eyes. How had I not noticed before? How had I not seen the royal blood that ran in his veins? "Mama," he exclaimed when he saw me running into my arms. "Look what I'm making!" I hugged him tightly, inhaling the scent of his hair, feeling the warmth of his small body. My son. My prince. It's a very beautiful castle, I said, my voice thick with emotion. It's our castle, he replied with the simplicity of childhood. For all of us to live together. You, me, Eleanor, and the king. I froze, surprised. The king? Tam nodded, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Yes, the king with eyes like mine. He said he will protect us forever. I exchanged a look with the nanny, who seemed as surprised as I was. When did the king say this, Tam? This morning. He came to visit us while you were out. My heart raced. So the king was already moving his pieces, building bonds with the children, ensuring they would accept him. And what else did he say? Tam thought for a moment, his brow furrowed in concentration. He said he has a very big black horse that he will teach me to ride, and that Eleanor can have all the books she wants from the royal library. Eleanor, hearing her name, approached with her drawing. He showed me this. Mama, she said, extending a small silver locket hanging from a delicate chain around her neck. He said it was my grandmother's. The locket had the same symbol the king had shown in the council, the crescent moon crossed by a sword, the emblem of Lord Tormain. My father, he, said anything else? Eleanor nodded, her eyes shining with a wisdom beyond her years. He said you have an important decision to make, and that, no matter what it is, he will always protect us. The words hit me like stones. The king was playing on all fronts, ensuring that even if I refused his proposal, the children were already bound to him by ties of affection and promises. That night, after the children slept, I remained alone with my thoughts and doubts. A part of me wanted to refuse, to flee, to take my children far from this nest of vipers that was the court. Another part, however, recognized the futility of that idea. Where would we go that the king could not find us? And more importantly, what future would my children have as fugitives when they could have a kingdom? The king's words echoed in my mind. As my queen, you would be untouchable. I, who had spent my life being touched, pushed, groped, used, and discarded by the powerful. I, who learned to bow, to lower my eyes, to be grateful for crumbs. Untouchable. The word tasted of freedom and power. But at what price? The next 2 days passed in a blur of activities and preparations. Apparently the king had given orders for me to be properly prepared for the new moon ball, regardless of my answer to his proposal. This meant endless hours of etiquette lessons, dress fittings, dance classes, instructions on royal protocol. For the children, the new routine was an exciting adventure. Tam spent his mornings with a tutor who taught him the first letters and numbers, and his afternoons with a young knight who initiated him into the rudiments of swordsmanship with wooden swords. Eleanor, always more studious, devoured the books that arrived daily from the royal library, stories about princesses and dragons, but also simple treatises on the stars and neighbouring kingdoms. I watched them flourish like plants finally finding light after years in the shadows, and my heart broke a little with each smile, each discovery, each new skill. How could I deny them this? How could I tear them away from this life of privilege and opportunity, even if the price was my freedom? On the afternoon of the 3rd day, hours before the ball, Madame Ciel came to visit me while I was being prepared. 3 maids worked on me simultaneously. One arranging my hair in an elaborate coiffure of braids and curls, another polishing my nails, a third adjusting the final details of a night blue silk gown that had arrived that morning. You are almost ready for your grand moment, the governess commented, observing me with a mix of pride and concern. I haven't decided if there will be a grand moment yet, I replied, trying not to move my head as the maid worked on my hair. Madame Ciel dismissed the servants with a gesture, and they withdrew silently, leaving us alone. The king expects an answer tonight, she said without preamble. Before the ball. I sighed, the weight of the imminent decision crushing my chest. I know. And what will your answer be, Lady Aline? The question hung in the air, heavy as lead. What would my answer be? In the past few days, I had wavered between yes and no hundreds of times. Every argument in favor was balanced by one against. Every dream of power was countered by a nightmare of confinement. I don't know, I confessed finally. I don't know if I can be what he needs, what the kingdom needs. Madame Ciel sat in a nearby chair, her aged eyes studying me intently. May I tell you a story, Lady Aline? I nodded, grateful for the distraction, however momentary. 30 years ago, I was a young woman not unlike yourself. Not a servant, but the daughter of a small merchant. Beautiful enough to attract attention, clever enough to understand the games of court. Her voice had a nostalgic tone I had never heard before. The young Prince Aldrich, father of the current king, noticed me during a festivity. We were young, impulsive, passionate. For an entire summer, we loved each other in secret. And then, you became pregnant, I completed. Seeing the parallel with my own story, she nodded, a sad smile touching her lips. Yes, but unlike the current king, Aldrich was unwilling to defy conventions. He was already betrothed to a princess from a neighboring kingdom, a crucial alliance for peace. So instead of recognizing me, he gave me two options: lose the child, or lose her in another way. A shiver ran down my spine. What did you choose? The third option, the one he didn't offer. I gave birth in secret with the help of a trusted midwife, and gave my son to a noble family who could not have children. And he grew up without knowing who he truly was. Madame Ciel looked out the window, her eyes lost in distant memories. He grew to become a man everyone respected and feared, a man of honor, courage, and unwavering loyalty. A sudden comprehension struck me. Lord Alaric Tormain. Her eyes met mine, shining with unshed tears. My son. Your father. The shock was like a physical blow. Madame Ciel, the austere governess who had supervised my work for years, was my grandmother. The mother of the man I never knew, but whose blood ran in my veins. Why did you never say anything? I asked, my voice choked. Why did you let me work as a servant, suffer humiliations, when I could have protected you? She shook her head. It wasn't so simple. The old King Aldrich suspected the truth about Alaric. If I showed any special interest in you, it would have confirmed his suspicions. And then I would have been a danger, just as my father was. Precisely. The pieces began to fit. Lord Alaric's mysterious death, the effort to hide my true identity, the current king's belated interest in finding me. Does King Darius know about this? About you being Lord Alaric's mother? Yes, he discovered it shortly after taking the throne. It was one of the reasons he kept me at court, promoting me to head governess. It was his way of honoring his mentor's memory by protecting his mother. I tried to process everything. Not only was I the daughter of a noble, the granddaughter of a king, but I was about to marry another king who was, in a way, my distant cousin. The irony would be comical if it weren't tragic. Why are you telling me this now? Madame Ciel, my grandmother, stood up and walked to me, taking my hands in hers. Because you need to understand what is at stake. It is not just about you or your children or even the king. It is about breaking a cycle of secrets and lies that almost destroyed this kingdom. Her voice gained an unusual urgency. King Darius is not like his father. He is offering you what Aldrich never offered me: recognition, position, power. But for love or for strategy? A faint smile touched her lips. In his position, the two are indistinguishable. But I have seen how he looks at you, Eileen. I have seen how his eyes follow you when you are not looking. There is fire there, not just cold calculation. The idea that the king, Darius, could actually feel something for me, beyond political necessity, was both unsettling and electrifying. And what do you think I should do? I asked, suddenly desperate for guidance. Her answer was direct and without hesitation. Accept, become queen. Protect your children. Change this kingdom. I don't know if I have the strength for that. You have more strength than you imagine. The blood of Alaric Tormain runs in your veins. And mine too. She squeezed my hands. We, women of the shadow, survive. Always. When she left, I remained alone with my thoughts, more turbulent than ever. The servants returned to finish my preparation, but I barely noticed them. My mind was absorbed by the revelation, by the imminent decision, by the weight of the history I suddenly discovered I carried. A knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. The servants stopped their work, exchanging nervous glances. The door opened without waiting for an answer, and there he was, the king, formally dressed for the ball in a black suit with silver details that accentuated the colour of his eyes. Eyes like Tam's, eyes that now studied me intently. "Leave us," he commanded, and the servants hurried out, closing the door behind them. We were alone. I sitting before the mirror in my ball gown, he standing at the entrance, so different from the young hunter who had seduced me years ago, and yet, undeniably, the same man. "It's almost time," he said, his voice softer than usual. "I came to know your answer." I stood up, feeling the weight of the dress, the tightness of the corset, the tingling of my scalp, where the pins held the elaborate hairstyle, all so strange, so different from the simplicity I was accustomed to. "Madame Ciel told me the truth," I said, "about Lord Alaric, about the old king." Something flashed in his eyes, surprise perhaps, or concern. She had never told anyone. She never had a granddaughter before. My voice was firmer than I felt inside. Or perhaps there has never been so much at stake. He took a step toward me. "And does that change your decision?" A simple question laden with so many layers. Did it change? To know that I carried royal blood, that the woman I thought was merely the governess was actually my grandmother, that the cycle of secrets and lies had affected generations? "Yes," I replied finally. "It changes everything." His face remained impassive, but I saw a subtle tension in his jaw. "And what is your answer, Lady Eileen?" I looked out the window, at the moon beginning to rise on the horizon. A new moon, a beginning. For my children, for the kingdom, for me. For a brief moment, I thought of all the lives that had brought me here. My mother's life, cut short too soon. Lord Alaric's life, my father I never knew. Madame Ciel's life, my grandmother who hid in plain sight. Lives shaped by difficult choices, by secrets, by sacrifices. And then I thought of the lives that depended on my choice now. Elena, Tam, and in a way the kingdom itself. I turned to him, lifting my chin in a gesture that was no longer submission, but decision. "My answer is yes. I will be your queen." I paused, my eyes fixed on his. "But I will not be merely a piece in your game. I will be your partner, your equal. I will have a voice on the council, power over my own destiny and that of my children." A slow, genuine smile spread across his face, not the king's calculated smile, but the smile of the man who had danced with me under the stars. I would expect nothing less from the daughter of Alaric Tormane. He approached, taking my hands in his. "We have an agreement then, an alliance. More than an alliance," I corrected. "A new beginning." His eyes shone with an emotion I couldn't fully decipher. Satisfaction. Certainly, perhaps even joy, but there was something more. Something that seemed almost reverence. "A new beginning," he agreed, bringing my hand to his lips in a soft kiss. "For all of us." The moon hall was packed when we entered. Hundreds of candles in crystal chandeliers poured golden light over the elegant crowd that chatted, laughed, and danced to the sound of an orchestra. All the nobles of the kingdom seemed to be present, displaying their finest clothes and most valuable jewels. Our entrance caused the immediate silence that always accompanied the king's arrival. But this time it wasn't just the king they observed. It was me, the former servant, now dressed as a queen, with my arm intertwined with his. The eyes that followed me held diverse emotions: surprise, curiosity, envy, disdain. I saw Lady Mirren among a group of ladies, her face a mask of contained fury. I saw the Duke of Vallisea, watching us with calculating eyes. I saw Madame Ciel, my grandmother, standing discreetly in a corner, a small smile of approval on her lips. The children had been left with their nannies, with the promise that they would join us later for the formal announcement. This separation made me anxious, but the king had assured me they were under the strictest protection. "Breathe," Darius whispered in my ear as we walked through the hall. "You were born for this, even if you don't know it yet." Born for this. The words echoed in my mind. Could it be true? I, who spent my life in the shadows, in the dark corners of the castle, born to be under the light of chandeliers, to wear a crown. I doubt they would agree with that, I replied softly, indicating with a slight nod the hostile glances that surrounded us. It does not matter if they agree. What matters is that they believe. He smiled, that smile that didn't reach his eyes, the smile of the strategist king. And they will believe after tonight. We reached the center of the hall where a space had been cleared for dancing. The master of ceremonies announced the first waltz of the night to be led by the king. It was tradition for the king to dance with the noblest lady present, which, under normal circumstances, would be Lady Myrenne or another high-ranking noble. But tonight, he extended his hand to me. Lady Aileen Tormain, will you grant me this dance? A murmur of astonishment swept through the hall. I took his hand, feeling the tremor in my fingers, praying no one else noticed. It would be an honor, Your Majesty. The orchestra began to play and suddenly we were dancing, twirling through the hall as if it were the most natural thing in the world. In the past 48 hours, I had had intensive dance lessons, but even so, the fear of stumbling, of making a fool of myself, was almost paralyzing. Look at me, not your feet, he instructed, his voice low for my ears alone. Trust me, I will guide you. I raised my eyes to meet his, that silvery grey now familiar, and something happened. A connection, a memory, a recognition. Suddenly, we were no longer in the formal hall, but in a clearing under the stars, like that night so many years ago. My body relaxed, surrendering to the rhythm, to the music, to the firm guidance of his hands. And then, to my own surprise, I was dancing, not like an awkward servant, but as if I had been born for it, as if the music had always been a part of me. See? He murmured, a genuine smile lighting his face. It's in your blood. The waltz ended too soon, or perhaps it lasted an eternity. When we stopped, I realized we were the only ones in the center of the hall. Everyone else had stopped to watch, mesmerized by the sight of the king dancing with the woman who until a few days ago was known only as the bastard. A hesitant applause began, slowly growing into a roar. It wasn't approval necessarily, but recognition. The king had made his choice and no one would dare question it openly. Darius did not release my hand. Instead, he led me to the small raised platform where his throne was positioned. Beside it, a second chair had been placed, smaller but equally ornamented. A throne for the queen. The master of ceremonies struck his staff 3 times on the floor, and the hall fell into complete silence. People of the Northern Kingdom? Darius began, his voice projecting to reach every corner of the vast hall. Tonight, under the new moon, is a night of new beginnings, of revelations and truths long hidden. He paused, his eyes sweeping the crowd, as if daring anyone to interrupt. 3 days ago, this council recognized Lady Eileen as the legitimate daughter of Lord Alaric Tormane, restoring her to her rightful position as a noble of this kingdom. He squeezed my hand lightly. Today I have another revelation to make, one that will forever change the course of this kingdom. The silence was so profound that I could hear my own heart beating. Lady Eileen is not only Lord Tormain's daughter, she is also the mother of my son. The shock was palpable. Audible gasps, murmurs of disbelief, even a few muffled cries. Lady Myrenne's face paled, and I saw the Duke of Valisir grip the sword at his waist, though he did not draw it. 7 years ago, during a visit to the lowlands, I met a young woman of incomparable beauty and spirit. Darius's voice softened, becoming almost intimate, as if he were telling a story just for me. I spent a night with her, a single night I never forgot. And from that night, a son was born. A prince of royal blood, legitimate heir to the throne. The side door of the hall opened, and Madame Ciel entered, leading Tam and Eleanor by the hand. The children were dressed in formal attire, small replicas of noble garments. Tam looked confused but excited, his grey eyes, his father's eyes, the king's eyes, wide at the grandeur of the hall. Eleanor, always more perceptive, seemed nervous, clinging to Madame Ciel's hand as if her life depended on it. Prince Tamrin Valanis, Darius announced, extending his hand to my son, our son, the future king of the Northern Kingdom. Tam looked at me uncertain. I nodded encouragingly and he released Madame Ciel's hand, walking hesitantly toward us. Darius knelt, picking him up with a naturalness that surprised me. The contrast between them was powerful, the king in his formal attire, holding the small boy whose eyes were the perfect reflection of his own. "And Princess Elena Valanis," he continued, turning to my daughter, "who from today will be formally recognized as my daughter by adoption, with all corresponding rights and privileges." Elena did not move immediately. Her eyes, my eyes, met mine, full of silent questions. I extended my free hand to her, and only then did she approach, standing beside me, her small hand firm in mine. "Tonight," Darius continued, his voice rising again to reach the entire hall, "I announce my intention to take Lady Elaine Tormain as my queen, my wife, and consort. The marriage will be performed within a month on the next full moon." The murmurs grew, a hum of voices that swelled like a wave. I saw the Duke of Valisea's face contorted in fury. I saw Lady Myrenne leave the hall hastily, accompanied by her ladies. But I also saw nods, hesitant smiles, admiring glances directed at the children, especially Tam, whose kinship with the king was undeniable to anyone who saw their eyes side by side. "Does anyone wish to speak against this union?" Darius challenged, his gaze fixed on the Duke of Valisea. For a tense moment, I thought the Duke would actually speak. His fingers tightened on his sword hilt, his face flushed with anger. But then slowly he inclined his head in a gesture of reluctant acceptance. Not out of respect for me, certainly, but out of respect for the king's power, and perhaps out of fear of what would happen if he publicly opposed his sovereign's will. "Then it is decided." Darius smiled, a triumphant smile he did not try to hide. "Raise your glasses in a toast to the future Queen Elaine and the princes of the Northern Kingdom." Servants circulated quickly with crystal goblets filled with golden wine. One was placed in my free hand, another in Darius's. The children received small chalices of fruit juice. "To Queen Elaine," someone shouted in the crowd, and to my surprise the entire hall responded, "To Queen Elaine!" Glasses were raised, the toast echoed, and then the music resumed. People returned to dancing, conversing, celebrating, some sincerely, others merely pretending. The courtly game continued, only with new pieces on the board. Darius placed Tam back on the floor, whispering something in his ear that made the boy smile. Then, turning to me, he took my goblet and placed it with his on a nearby table. "Come with me," he said softly. "There's something I need to show you." Reluctant to leave the children, I looked at Elena and Tam. "They will be safe with Madame Seal," Darius assured me. "No one would dare touch the princes of the kingdom now that they have been publicly recognized." I hesitated for another moment, then knelt to kiss each of their foreheads. "Behave," I instructed. "I will be back soon." Madame Ciel, my grandmother, it was still strange to think of her that way, approached and took the children's hands. "Take good care of them," I asked. She nodded, an enigmatic smile on her lips. "As I always took care of you, even when you did not know." Darius led me out of the hall, through corridors I had never traversed before. We ascended a spiral staircase so narrow that I had to lift the hem of my dress to avoid tripping. Finally, we arrived at a small, dark wooden door, locked with a key Darius took from a cord around his neck. "What is this place?" I asked as he unlocked the door. "A place that belonged to generations of kings. A place where we keep our greatest treasures and our greatest secrets." The door opened to a circular room with walls covered in shelves from floor to ceiling. Ancient books, parchments, small chests and boxes of all sizes and materials. In the center, a round table with a map carved into the wood. The map of the kingdom and the lands beyond. "The Starfall Chamber," Darius explained, lighting some candles. "Named so because from here, one can see the sky like nowhere else in the castle." He pointed upwards, and only then did I notice that the ceiling was a glass dome, revealing the night sky in all its glory. Countless stars shone above us, and the new moon, almost invisible, made the sky even darker, making the stars even brighter. "It's beautiful," I whispered, marveling. It was here that my father told me the truth about Lord Alaric. On his deathbed, Darius's voice was solemn, and it was here that I swore to find his daughter and protect her, as Alaric protected me. He walked to one of the shelves and took out a small leather-bound book, worn by time and use. This is Lord Alaric's journal. He kept it secret, writing in a code that only he and my father fully understood. Darius carefully leafed through the yellowed pages. It took me years to decipher all the entries, but when I did, I discovered the truth about you. I reached out, hesitant, and he handed me the book. The pages were covered with small, precise writing in a system of symbols I did not recognize. But here and there were drawings in the margins, small sketches of a woman, a child, a distant castle. He wrote about me, I asked, my voice choked with emotion. He wrote about his plans for you. About how he intended to bring you to the castle when you were old enough. About how he would prepare you to take your place as his heir. Darius paused. And about how he feared his enemies might try to reach you. A chill ran down my spine. The same enemies who killed him. Yes, Darius closed the book carefully. And I fear they are still among us. The Duke of Valisea? He is part of the conspiracy, certainly. But I do not believe he is the mastermind behind it. His eyes met mine, dark and intense. That is why I needed you by my side. Eline, not just as the mother of my son, not just as a symbol of legitimacy, but as someone who saw the court from an angle I could never see. From the shadows, I understood. From the corners where the powerful don't think to look. Precisely. He moved closer, taking my hands in his. Together we can discover who truly killed your father. We can end the conspiracy that threatens not only my reign, but the future of our children. Our children. The phrase still sounded strange, but somehow right. What if I fail? What if I am not the queen you expect me to be? A soft smile touched his lips. You will not fail, Eline. You have already survived more than most nobles would ever face. You survived abandonment, poverty, scorn. You raised 2 children alone, maintained your dignity in a world that tried to crush you at every step. His hand touched my face with surprising gentleness. You are stronger than you think. Stronger than anyone thinks. Suddenly tears burned in my eyes. Not tears of fear or sadness, but of a profound recognition. The recognition that, for the first time in my life, someone truly saw me. Not as a servant, not as a bastard. Not as a single mother, but as a complete woman. With strengths and frailties, with a past and a future. Then we will do this together, I said, finding my voice despite the tears. We will discover the truth. We will protect our children. We will build a kingdom where no one else needs to live in the shadows. Darius nodded, his eyes never leaving mine, together. And then, under the starry sky, with the weight of history and the future on our shoulders, he leaned in and kissed me. It was not the hurried, passionate kiss of the festival 7 years ago, nor the formal protocol kiss that would be expected of a king for his future queen. It was a kiss of promise, of partnership, of mutual respect. A new beginning, as we had said. For him, for me, for our children, for the entire kingdom. When we returned to the hall, hand in hand, something had changed. Not just between us, but in the air around us. People bowed more deeply. The looks of disdain had been replaced by looks of curiosity, even cautious respect. Tam ran to us as soon as he saw us, throwing himself into Darius's arms with a naturalness that surprised me. Elena followed more slowly, her eyes observing. Everything, evaluating, understanding more than a child her age should. Are you really going to be our father now? She asked Darius, her voice small but clear. He knelt to be at her eye level. If you will allow me, Princess, it would be the greatest honor of my life. She studied him for a long moment, with that seriousness that was always her hallmark. Will you make Mama cry? The question, so direct, so innocent, and yet so profound, caught us both by surprise. I saw Darius swallow hard before answering. I will do my best so that your tears are only of joy. Elena continued to study him, like a small judge weighing a witness's sincerity. Promise. I promise, Princess, with all my heart. Finally, she nodded, apparently satisfied. Then it's okay. You can be our father. A genuine smile lit Darius's face, not the king's calculated smile, but the smile of a man who had just received an unexpected and precious gift. Thank you, Elena. I will not disappoint you. And there, surrounded by the court, under the glow of the chandeliers and the weight of gazes, We became a family. Not a conventional family, certainly, built on secrets and strategies as much as on affection, but a family nonetheless, who had always lived on the margins, always in the shadows, was now at the center of everything, not just as the future queen, but as the axis around which a new era would begin to revolve. The thought was terrifying and electrifying at the same time. As I watched Darius with the children, as I felt the court's gaze on me, some hostile, others curious, others calculating, I knew the path ahead would be difficult. There would be conspiracies to unravel, enemies to face, challenges to overcome. But for the first time in my life, I would not be alone on this journey. I would have Darius by my side, Madame Ciel, my grandmother, as an ally, and the strength that came from finally knowing who I was, where I came from, where I was going. The bastard had become queen. The forgotten had been remembered. The invisible was now seen by all. And this was just the beginning of our story.